So what I'm going to do here is I want to demo some logic that we're going to see regarding the DOM. And at the same time, let's actually go and set up Webpack just to see Webpack getting used again. We don't necessarily have to use Webpack for ES6, but let's go ahead and just set it up anyway. So I'm going to create a directory, and I'm going to call this DOM. I'm going to call this DOM demo. And I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to CD into it. So this is a little shortcut you could do. And again, I like this because you remember when we ended up doing the tasks where we were saying we wanted to do things simultaneously? Here we create the directory, but we don't want to do this simultaneously. We want to create the directory, and then we want to go into the directory. The $_ ends up giving you the directory that you ended up creating, and you can just CD into this in one shot. And I'm going to want to do an npm init. Now, again, if I did npm init, it would ask me a bunch of questions, and I would be hitting enter to all of them. If I just do y, that's a flag, means I just want to answer yes to all the questions. A lot of flags that you end up using with this stuff. Okay? Now I'm going to end up installing npm install, and I'm going to install Webpack, and I'm going to save it. So again, Webpack is good for packing, meaning that it's going to allow you to specify different files. It will end up packing them together. It's going to allow you to use a pattern, which is a require pattern, which allows you to require other files. This is something that the DOM doesn't do for you, but Webpack will end up doing because it's all going to be putting your code in one spot. It's going to end up packing all your files. You wouldn't have a need for Webpack if you were running stuff on the server, but on the client, we're going to use it. So one thing that I want to be clear about is if I just type Webpack, nothing happens. If I installed Webpack globally, it would. Okay? What I need to do is I need to get to the Webpack executable. So I'm going to say node modules, and I'm going to say Webpack, and in the bin directory for Webpack, there's a Webpack.js, which is an executable. And I'm going to hit enter. Okay? And I get an error because it says the output file is not found. Let me open up my editor of choice, and let's just take a look at something. What I want to do here is I want to add a source file. And in the source file, I'm going to add an index.js. And I'll go over here and I'll say console.log, hello world. Just some plain old JavaScript. And what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to put that command that I had before. And I'm going to specify, hey, look, I want you to start out with, so with the web, so what I'm doing here, when I access Webpack from the command line, which is what I'm doing here, I'm running the command Webpack. If you look at the command for Webpack, you could give Webpack a lot of flags, but two things Webpack needs for sure is the input and the output. So I'm going to give it the input by saying source index.js, and I'm going to give it the output by saying /dist bundle.js. And I'm going to hit enter, and it'll end up running. And if I end up going here, and I look, I'll see my dist, and I'll see my bundle, and there's all this other code here, and here's my console.log. Okay? And again, what Webpack is going to allow us to do is to separate things out into different files and have one entry point, not worry about one thing loading before another thing. The other thing that Webpack allows us to do is to transpile. Okay? We don't transpile with Webpack. We transpile with Babel. Okay? So one of the things that Webpack can do is Webpack gives you the ability to use loaders. Loaders specify that you want to manipulate the files. Okay? So again, just know in the ecosystem. It's not like you got to create everything from scratch every time, but understand why you're using these things. So if we go over here, what I want to do here is create a simple HTML page. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to put HTML. And I'll go over here and I'll put in head. And here I'll say /dist bundle.js. Put a body tag here. And if I go over and just simply do open dot, and I go over here and I double click on this, this should open up in Chrome. And if I look at this, I should see hello world. Okay? Now, again, if I decide that I want to make a change to my file, I could go over here and specify some exclamation points. Of course, nothing's going to happen here unless I go over here and I run my webpack command again. And now if I went back here, I would see the exclamation points, okay? But that's kind of an annoying thing to do. So if I was just doing this from the command line, I could run this. And I could put a flag here. And every time that I make a change here, I'll do that twice. I go back here. If I rerun this, I should see that'll end up showing up twice. Now, that's fine, right? That's nice. Except if I killed my project, closed it out, went in, opened it up again next week, and I got to remember what that command is. Okay? So it'd be nice if I could put that command here somewhere. So a good place to put that command is going to be in my package.json file. And so what I could do in my package.json file is simply go over here and put a command in here of webpack. And again, /node modules, webpack, bin, webpack.js. Okay? And again, if I want to, I could go over here and say /source index.js and say .dist bundle.js. And if I wanted to, I could just say npm run webpack, and it'll end up bundling my files for me. But it would be nice if I were able to have that watch command too. Again, you might ask, why am I separating out these two? Well, the fact of the matter is that if I was to go deploy this code somewhere, what I might want to do when I deploy this code is that you never want to put your compiled code. If your code is compiled or transpiled from something else, you don't need to put the transpiled code up in your repo. It's going to bloat it, okay? But if I went to deploy this somewhere, I could specify, hey, look, after you end up deploying somewhere, run webpack. And I would just want it to run webpack. I don't want it to watch anything. I just want it to run webpack. But if I'm running locally, I'm going to want to watch it. So here's where I can, right from within this, say npm run webpack and pass in to the webpack command the watch flag. And this allows me to do this. By the way, if you forget what you could run, npm run shows you what you're capable of running without running anything. npm run webpack watch. Now I've got it on my command line. Okay, that's fine. That'll work. But it would be nice if, in fact, we might want to change our settings here. We might want to put in some loaders here. So if we get rid of this, and I'm going to kill this and go back and run it again, we're going to be back to our error before, which is that it doesn't know an output file. And this is where the webpack config comes in. Really only two things we need here. And we'll go in here and put in module.exports. Make this a little bit bigger. And the two things it needs is an entry, and this is going to be /source index.js, and an output, and this is going to be an object. The path is going to be /dist, that's a directory. File name is going to be bundle. Probably other ways to do the same thing. And now if I went back here, I could run that. And any change that I end up making here, so if I go back in and I change this to one hello world, because I'm preserving my log here, and I rerun it, I'll see that will work. So again, what does Webpack give you? We don't need it for this lesson, but just for the sake of argument, I could go in here and I could say, again, we're not doing ES6 here. If we were doing ES6, then we could end up using ES6 syntax. We'll go back and forth a little bit. It's not that big a deal. Let's say I do var foo from, doing this incorrectly, var foo equals require. So it's slightly different syntax, require. Here you have to actually do a /. This basically says this is one of our files. And I could go in here and say I'm requiring foo. And let's say when I require foo, I'm going to say, hey, look, foo, why don't you bar? Okay? Again, let's see if this even runs. So first of all, I get this error that it can't find this file foo. Let's go in here and create it. That error goes away, but of course, when I go to run it, it says, well, you have a problem because foo is really nothing. Okay? The reason why it's nothing is that the same way that we had our module exports in our Webpack, we could put it in here, and we're going to do module exports. And what we'll end up doing here is we'll export. So what did we say? We're going to call bar on this thing. So we're going to do module exports. Bar is a function. And when we call bar, we'll say console.log hello. So again, different syntax that when you're using other files, okay, ES6 has the import syntax. Okay? So if we were using ES6, we would do the import syntax. Our export would be slightly different. We could have named exports, which we haven't done yet. But if you remember in the weekend project, right, it was export default is how you do something similar to this. All right? So two different ways of requiring modules. One of them is called the common JS pattern, which is what we'll end up using in Node. But for the ES6 pattern, which gets used in React and that sort of thing, you'll end up seeing the export being a little bit different. And again, it could very well be 6 of one, half dozen of another. You should just be aware of both of them. So this, if I do this and I rerun this, I end up getting hello, right? Because I'm exporting this object, which is being used here. By the way, if you looked at this bundle, you would see that I've got some, here's the code that I'm running, and here's my other export that's being used here, right? So here's my export, and here's where I'm using the export, okay? It actually isn't even it's telling you how to do it. See, it's saying underneath the covers, Webpack require one. And this is just a comma delimited list of modules here. So one is actually, it's telling you one is this guy, right? And 0 is this guy. Again, you don't have to go and look at this file too often, but under the covers, it's bundling and allowing you to use this requires syntax in the browser, which you really don't have access to within the browser. Because again, why don't you have access to it? Because you're loading separate files, okay? And it's not really going to work when you load separate files in the browser, but it's going to bundle the files together and everything's going to be in one file. Again, another example of using Webpack simplistically, bringing something in here. Any questions? We've seen that a couple of times now. Is that starting to sink in, how to use Webpack? Why to use it?
It's more of a convenience thing, but is there a way to set it up to automatically reload the page when you save?
You know, there are. What bothers me with that sort of stuff is that I always see on these tutorials, like in order to do that, there's like 2 or more packages that have to be set up to do it. And I always find, for me, it's not, maybe something you should do. I just have never really done it that much and haven't been that successful when I've tried to do it. I haven't spent all that much time on it. But you'll see that people do love the fact that they can change their files and automatically have the browser update, very similar to what we ended up doing when we were doing testing. So at some point, maybe we'll take a look at that, but we'd have to actually add another module in order to do that.
You use save as a parameter there when you install Webpack, you -save.
Yeah.
So I have like 2 or 3 folders that I created and I uploaded Webpack. Every time it saves there, it's like a big file that I'm saving.
It could very well be a big file that you're using. That could very well be the case.
And if you don't use save, what would be the...
If you don't end up doing save, if in fact you've done an npm init on it, the only thing let's be very clear about something. If you don't do an npm init, I'm not sure where it installs it. I think it might even install it globally for all I know. All right? But the reason why you do save, let's be very clear about that. The reason why you do save is that when you end up creating a Git project, one thing that I want to do with a Git project, so if I end up killing this for a second, and I say git.status, I don't have Git set up for this project, okay? But if I initialize Git, okay, and I say git.status, notice that my node modules folder doesn't come up. And that's because I have a default setting that says never, ever use the node modules folder. But the other thing that I don't need here is my dist folder. So what I'll often do here is do this in my local and say echo this / into .git ignore. And if I go over here and now I say git.status, you'll see that that dist folder ended up going away. I don't need it. It's something that's compiled. It's got all that Webpack stuff in it that I don't need. So the reason why you do the save is that so when someone else grabs your project, they know the modules that you used and the versions that you ended up using. Okay, so the reason why you end up doing that, if you don't end up doing the save there, let's be pretty clear about this. If you didn't do the save there, and someone went and they pulled your project in from GitHub, you uploaded it to GitHub and you said to someone, clone my repository. And they went and they cloned your repository and they tried to run this command, Webpack wouldn't be installed on their machine. If you've put it in your package JSON file, then the only thing that would happen is that they'd have to do npm install and then Webpack would be there. You have in your project Webpack as a dependency, but you don't want to include it in your source code. It's not yours. I mean, it's not. There's no license issue with doing it. It's just, what's the point?
So by including that npm run Webpack, that makes so that they can just take what's on the repository and then they'll have Webpack installed.
No, this is going to run Webpack for them to create that dist folder with the bundle file. This is going to show them that Webpack is in there.
You do npm start to install everything that's
npm install. Okay, and you can see that that's actually a good example. So if I went over here and I said npm run Webpack, it'll run. Okay, if I say rm.rf node modules, and I try to run that again, it won't be able to find it. And that would be the case if someone pulled down your repository. Okay? Because again, at least my repository, because I don't have that node modules folder in my repo. But then someone would say, and usually in your README file, you'll say, run npm install, and these are the commands that you could run. And I'll get those files back. Let's also, just to beat a dead horse a little bit, let's initialize this.
So the only reason you run npm, the only reason you not do npm install, but the only reason after you do npm install is you install webpack save, is to get that JSON, that package JSON file, so that when you've installed npm, npm knows what to do.
Well, let's take this case. Let's go over here and say git.add git.commit first commit. Okay. So just to sort of show you this, here's my git.status. Okay. I'm going to go over here and say rmrf node modules. Git.status. No change, because I'm ignoring my node modules. Okay. That means that if I ended up pushing my repo up and someone cloned my repo, they're not getting that node modules folder. Okay. That means that if they ended up going to run npm run webpack, it's going to die. Okay. The second you end up pulling a project that uses npm, the first thing you do, npm install.
So that dash save, all it does is modify the package.
That's exactly right. The dash save makes a basically catalogs what you want the user to install when they do npm install. Right? Does that?
npm install is, if I take your repository, is actually installing webpack too.
That's exactly right.
We did the first time.
That's right.
They don't have to do it the second time
Well,
because they're doing npm. npm's doing it.
no. I think you're mixing up two things: npm init and npm install. Okay. And by the way, someone uses my repo, they don't do npm init. Okay. npm init creates the package JSON file. If you take my repo, you have no. If you're creating a repository, you do npm init. If you're cloning a repository, you don't do npm init. You only do npm init when you don't have a package JSON file.
Oh. So if I had an npm installed on my computer and I took your,
Let's use our words carefully. What do you mean when you say that? When you have an
I
npm,
did npm install when I install Node. Okay, so my computer now has npm on it. Right?
okay. So in other words, let's be clear about what you did. You ended up using npm to go out to the internet to get a program to install on your computer.
Yes.
Okay.
So now you did this little demo and said, oh, by the way, fork it and then do what you have to do and run it. So then I get it on my local machine and I never installed Webpack, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
So I do my, I try to
Run the command.
run the command,
Right.
and it's not there.
Right.
So what do I have to do?
I mean, you should just, by the way, if your machine doesn't have Node on it, I can't help you. Right?
But I did say
Well, I know, you said that, right? But again, the fact that you did an npm install of Node on your machine, that's fine. But that just impacts you. Doesn't impact anybody else. Okay? That's just all you did there. All you did there for that npm, I don't care that you used npm to install Node. Doesn't mean anything to me. It just means you installed some software on your computer. That's all.
I'm just trying to understand what you were outlining a process, okay, for if I was creating this repository, what to do, okay?
Okay.
That was the first part of this demo.
Right?
And then you were making a point about not saving to your repository Node modules.
Okay.
Because it's a waste of space.
Correct.
It goes to a repository. And it's not yours anyway, so don't.
Correct.
So the next thing that you were suggesting was, okay, now somebody might use this
Correct.
repository
Mhm.
that you just created. And in your README file, you would tell them, oh, install npm.
Let's be clear.
Or is that what you said?
I didn't say install npm. I said run the command npm install.
What is that command doing?
That's where I
I
was
showed
going.
you guys already. I showed
That
you
was
5
exactly where I
times.
was going. I was good for that.
Look. Huh?
Can I use that analogy?
Go ahead.
Okay, everyone here has a smartphone, right? We've switched smartphones. So you download your apps, like Apple was really good at this. So you go in and say, I want Slack on my home. So when you do that the first time, that's your npm install Slack. When you get your new phone, you don't have to install it again. Apple, you've said, I want this file, and it just does the install for you because you got the new phone. So when you do npm install, it's basically getting that new phone, making that new library, and saying, hey, these are all the apps I used to build this before.
Let me go grab.
Yeah, let me go grab them.
I mean, look, and what does npm install do? Look, rm.rf, node modules. It's gone. Right? npm install.
It's back.
Yeah.
And if you would have used Babel in this demo, it would.
As long as I had Babel in, as long as I made sure that I did the dash save.
npm would do it as well.
Well, no, what the save does is the save puts again, when you do npm install, all it's doing is looking in your package JSON file for your dependencies.
So what dash save does? You were just about to say.
Puts the entry in the package JSON file.
If you forgot to do dash save, and if you knew the last version, you could actually put it in yourself.
You could, but it would end up being, you'd have to know that you ended up doing that. You always want to, if it's a dependency in your project, you always want to put it in the package JSON file, or else what do you install it for? Right? So let's go over here. So we have this. Let's actually run this now. What do we call it? We called it npm run. Let's see what we called it. So this is going to be Webpack watch. Now we're going to do a little work with the DOM. What does this mean exactly? Well, let's go in here. And I got a couple of things that I want to look at. Just a sort of a simple demo here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say console.log window. Okay? The window object is like your global namespace. Think about it as the environment for your application. Okay? When a browser loads, the window is the big daddy, has everything else in it. If I go to run this now, it's going to tell me these are all the things that a window object can do. Window object has a lot of stuff in here. You know, you could create a new array. You can do that because it's on the window object. Okay? Everything on the window object, if you scroll down on the window object, you'll see that the window object has a document object. Okay? What happens is that when a browser loads a web page, okay, you can think about the web page as being text, but when that web page ends up getting loaded by a browser, it comes to life, and it can be manipulated. And that's what all these applications that are using the web as a platform allow you to do. So for an example, if I go over here, and I go over here and I say window.document, I'll see something else. Okay? I'll see that I have a document. And it shows me what my document is. This is my document, right? Make sense? Okay? Now, what I'm going to do here, what you have with the document object model is you have the ability to manipulate this in-memory object that's on your web page. And that's what we're going to do next. So there's a couple of basic methods. By the way, if it's on the window object, you don't have to put the window because window's the big daddy of them all. It's assumed that's the environment that you're operating in anyway. So this would give me the same result. Okay? The document object has a couple of useful commands that you could use. What I'm going to do here, first of all, is I'm going to go on my index page, and I'm going to put in a h1 with the text, hello. And I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to say h1, and I'm going to say document get elements by tag name. I know it's a mouthful. This is a method. What it does is that we have this living, breathing representation, not a living, breathing representation, we have this living, breathing tree, okay, in our environment now that we have access to. And if I end up doing this, and I go over here, and I didn't mean to do hi, I meant to do h1, and I say console.log h1. It's empty, okay? And I look over here and I say, that's weird. I've got this script tag here. That's loading. How come it's not finding my h1? Let's do something. Let's take this script tag. Let's put it down there. Now we've got an h1. Okay? We've actually got this h1. We could look at this h1. What does this h1 have? Well, it's got some inner HTML. Hello. Okay? These are all properties. And if I go over here, if I made this world, and I reload this, and I go down here, I'll see that the inner HTML is hello world. Okay? A couple of things I want you to be aware of. First of all, this is kind of annoying that we have to move this underneath. The reason we have to move it is that the script loads. Okay? If we have it on the top, the script loads, and it goes, well, I'm going to try to find these elements by tag name, but that tag hadn't loaded yet. Okay? Things load sequentially. Okay? So if I wanted this to work, but I wanted to put that script tag on the top of my page, there's a little trick you could use. You could put a little attribute on this tag that says defer, meaning don't run it until the DOM loads. All things you're going to see when we start looking at some of the frameworks we're going to see. And I've got this, guys. So the first thing I might want to do is look at this and say, that's kind of neat. I have that h1. In fact, let's be a little bit more clear. Let's call these h1s, right? Because we could have more than one of them. In fact, if we went over here, and I go over here, and I run this again, now I've got my two h1s with different values. What does this look like to you? Looks, right? God, it looks like an array. It really looks like an array. It smells like an array, right? And if we go over here and we ask the question, hey, array, is array h1s? Are you an array? Not an array. Feels like an array. It looks like an array. What does it feel like an array? It's indexed. Okay? It feels like an array because it's indexed. We have something at the 0 position. We have something at the 1 position. Okay? If I went over here, these are all things that are going to come up in the workshop. If I went over here and I said h1's 0, I'd see my hello world. Okay? If I went over here and I said h1's 1, I'd see hello world again. Boy, it smells like an array. In fact, if I said h1's dot length, gives me 2. The fact is that it smells like an array, but it's not. It's actually a collection. I could totally validly loop over this collection. Not a problem. I can do a for loop to loop over this collection. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, I like my map method. And I wanted to call map on my h1s. We know map is an array method, right? Undefined. So sometimes you run into this scenario where you have these types of collections, okay? And let's just, for the sake of argument, let's ask what this is. What are you, h1s? Says I'm an object. That's not too helpful. Okay? When we did this, it gave us a little bit of a better hint. When we open this up, it tells us it's an HTML collection. Okay? Special type of collection. By the way, if you want to turn this into an array, we could loop over it and push things into an array, but I'll show you an interesting thing you could do. So if I say h1's array, I'm going to take my h1s. Okay? Let me back up for a second. what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an array object. Okay? An array object has a slice method. Bear with me for a second. This is going to seem a little bit weird. An array object has a slice method. The slice method will give you basically part of an array. So if I have an array of 3 elements, and I say ARR, whatever that array is, ARR.slice 0, 1, it'll give me the first element. If I say 0, 2, it'll give me the first and the second element. This is exciting. I saw a yawn. It's recorded. No yawns here, folks. So what I want to do is I'm going to use this slice method in a very clever way. I'm going to call this slice method, okay? And I'm going to call it on H1s, okay? What this does, when you end up using call says, you know how we say we want to control context? Call says this slice method is usually called on the thing that's holding it, this empty array. We just want the method, okay? We just want to borrow the method, but call it on the H1s, okay? Call it on the H1s, and we want all of it. So start at the beginning and get everything, which is what that'll end up doing. And if we say H1's array, now if we open this up, we'll see that we have a regular array. We'll use this. It's something that can end up coming in handy. You might not memorize that, but what I'm getting at here is that if you have something and it smells like an array, but it doesn't have the array methods, you can end up coercing this thing into an array. So one thing that we see is that we have this data. Let's play around with it a little bit. Let's go over here. This is just to show you that you could turn this into an array, but let's take this array, and this H1s, and I'm just going to get the first one, and I'm going to take it, and I'm going to set its inner HTML to foo. So not only can I get elements, okay, but I also have the ability to modify them as well. Again, this won't throw an error if, in fact, I have these H1s that are on the page, but when this runs, I will get that. If I wanted to delay this happening, I can do a set timeout. What does set timeout do? Gives you a delay. This will delay this happening for 1 second. So now I'll see hello world, and then I'll see foo. Amazing, huh? Look, if you couldn't do things like this, then there's no way that you could have the applications that you're using. Just about every application you have now is manipulating the DOM. Okay? So there's no way that you can have the sort of applications that you have without being able to manipulate the DOM. Now, here we're changing a value. Let's do something a little bit different. I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to use a different method. Document get element by ID. Get elements by tags name gives you back not an array, but a collection, which we could turn into an array. And I'm going to pretend that I've got something with an ID of my list. Just to see that I have it, I'm going to say console log UL. I'm going to go over here. UL ID my list. And if I run that, it should show me that I have this element, my list, it's empty. By the way, this is helping me out with the Chrome developer tools. I mouse over this. It's showing it to me over here. You know what all that junk in there is for? It's all the padding and the margin that comes with an unordered list. Okay? Just the way it is. You can modify it if you wanted to. Unordered lists have their own margin and padding. But what if I wanted to add something to that unordered list? Well, one of the things that I could do here, if I go over here and I specify that I actually want to add something to the unordered list. So not only can I get something, I could also create something. Document, create element. In order to create an element, elements in the DOM are nothing more than they start out as tags. I could create this list item. I could set the list items inner HTML to foo. Now that's all well and good. I've basically created some object in memory, but it means absolutely nothing if I don't add it back into the DOM. I'm never going to see it. Okay? So I could go over here, and I could say ul append child li. And I could see that I have foo. And I could go over here, and I could create another one if I wanted to. And I'll go over here. Again, I'm just using the same variable. Here I'll say inner HTML. By the way, it's a good question. What do you expect? This is a good one. I think admit it myself. What do you expect to happen here? Because it comes back on stuff we've looked at already. What do you expect to happen here? Forget about the arrays and all that stuff. What do you expect to see when I load this? Foo. Why not bar? Okay, but I did change the variable li to point to this element. What did I do, right? If I have an li points to an object by reference, what did I do? So what I always like to say, we blew out the reference. Okay? I can't manipulate any li again unless I end up the first foo, unless I grab it again. But now, I wouldn't see anything unless I go over here and I change this and I say ul.append child, and this is going to be li. So this appends it on the bottom, and I get foo, and I get bar. Let me just show you one other thing. So what I'm going to do here is that, so very often you're going to end up manipulating the DOM. A couple of methods you'll end up using here. By the way, these are the methods. These are the native DOM methods. Okay? So there's a DOM specification. The browsers end up implementing it. And it says, hey, look, a DOM is going to load when this web page ends up loading. And we're going to set it up so that there's an API available. The browser manufacturers say we're going to set it up so that there's this API available, and we're going to implement the DOM according to this specification. The other thing that we have are events. Okay, so we can actually add things to the DOM. There are events. It's a tree structure. By the way, just to sort of see this a little bit more, another list equals document, create element, ul, and I'll go over here and I'll say li, append child, another list. And I could go over here and document, create element. This will be an unordered list. And I'll say one more dot inner HTML equals foo bar baz. And I'll add this to another list. Now, the only point that I'm getting at here is, here's our tree, okay? We've actually got a document, okay? And our tree says you have, and you can see the tree. If I go over here and I inspect this, the tree starts with the HTML. I've got a, on this level, I've got my head element. Within this, I've got a script tag here. All these things can be manipulated in the DOM. Here I've got the body. I've got two H1s that would be on the same level. And then I've got this tree with these two list items on the same level, but then I go down into another level. One way to sort of think about that is that if we looked at this UL, this LI would be the parent, this UL would be the grandparent, this body would be the great-grandparent, this HTML would be the great-great-grandparent, okay? It's a chain. It's just tree structure, okay? So it's important to see that, but let's just do one other thing. Let's go back to our H1s for a second. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to specify that I'm going to take this H1s, I'll take the first one. And I'm going to add an event listener, okay? What I want to do is I want to add an event. And I'm going to go over here. So what this should do is this should be my second H1, okay? And I'll go over here, and I'll say alert clicked. So if I go over here, add event listener, it should work. H1's 1. No, I think it just was not loading. This is my guess. Let's see. H1's 1. It's the second one. I'm sorry. So I see this clicked come up. Okay? Looks pretty good. But what else can we end up doing with this? Well, one thing that we might want to do is let's say that we wanted to see what this is inside of here. And I didn't mean to do an alert this. I'm going to do console.log this. So when you end up adding event handlers to DOM elements, okay, it actually is telling us that it's this element. It sort of makes sense. If you're adding an event handler to an element, this inside of that element is going to point to that element. Okay? That's fine. That works. Let's just do one other thing here. Let's just pretend we're also going to grab the body tag. So I'm going to go over here and I'll say body equals document, get elements by tag name, and we'll go over here and I'm going to put in body, and there's only one. I'm just going to grab this guy. I always like to see that I had it. Do I have the body? And there's my body tag. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to add an event listener for my body too. So I'll go over here and I'll say body, add event listener, click, function, console.log, this. So let's see what happens. Rerun this. I'm going to click on this element. Notice that both of these end up coming up. Notice the order that they came up. Okay? So events end up bubbling up. Okay? The H1 is underneath the body. The H1 is clicked on, but on the same token, the body has a click on it too. In fact, if I click anywhere on the page, that second one will come up. Right? Anywhere on here, you'll see body come up. Doesn't matter where it is, but if I click on here, you'll see the H1 come up first. Okay? Showing you what bubbling is of events. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, I didn't want it to bubble up after it hit the H1. Well, one of the things that ends up getting passed here that you don't see is a value. Again, it's very important to see this. We don't call these functions. Okay? We're setting up event handlers. One way to think about it, you're going to hear this a lot, is that we are subscribing to events. There's an event that's going to occur, that might occur, if a user clicks on this H1. And when they do, we want to know about it. Okay? So we're going to supply you with this callback function. Okay? what we'll get, again, we don't control the context in that callback function so easily. We could, but off the bat, it's going to point to the element that got clicked on. Okay? Or in the case of the body, it's going to point to the body as it ends up bubbling up. But we end up getting a value here that gets past us. This would give us information like where it was clicked on the page, if we wanted to do something with it. But one of the things we could do is we could go over here and say, hey, look, after you log this, do me a favor. This basically says, hey, look, event, don't bubble up. If there's another event handler above me, because it's a tree, and there could be, okay? If there's one above this, do me a favor. Don't bubble. And now, if I click on this guy, I just see it here. But if I click on any of these, I end up seeing them for the body. One last thing I'm going to do here is that we do have the ability to control the context. I'm going to do a pretty silly example of this. I'm going to go over here and create this function, onClick function. I'll say console.log this. And instead of actually putting this callback function in here, again, you always have to make the distinction. We're not calling this callback function here. We're not calling it. When we call a function, what do you see? Parentheses. We're not calling it. What we're saying is that something interesting is going to happen when that body gets clicked on. The DOM knows it gets clicked on. We want to know about it. So we want to call onClick. And we do that, and we have the same exact thing as we had before. Body. Now let's say we don't want the context here to be body. For whatever reason. We want it to be another context. We want this to point to something else. JavaScript gives us the ability to control context. One of the ways that we could control context, and I bring this up because we're going to end up seeing it when we end up looking at the game of life, is I'm going to create an object here. And inside of here, I'm going to put fizz and buzz. Just an object. And I'm going to say, do me a favor. When you call onClick, okay, when you call onClick, don't call onClick, but when you call onClick, bind it. Not to what you would normally bind it to, but do me a favor, bind it to this object. Bind is one of the ways that you can control context. It says, hey, look, this is the function, but when this function gets called, I don't care what you normally do, but when this function gets called, I want it bound to this object. Why might you do that? There could be any number of reasons why you want to do it. Maybe you're not that concerned about the element. Maybe you have some object that you want to work with when you get inside here. And now if I do that, I go over here, and I see that my context is now fizz and buzz. So you have the ability to control context in these callbacks. A lot of stuff here. Not a lot of lines of code, okay? But a lot of information. The idea that you have this DOM, that this DOM can end up getting manipulated, that you can query the DOM, that you could modify the DOM, that you could add event handlers to the DOM, okay? That these event handlers, you have the ability to control the context. Okay? Now, let's go through these slides relatively quickly because I think you will have seen most of this stuff in action. You could tell me whether or not the demo sort of helped get you through this a little bit. So here we're talking about the document object model, and the document object model is nothing but a tree, okay? Where you have basically these relationships between these objects. You have parent objects and child objects, and all this is doing is describing really a tree of objects. So why do we end up looking at the DOM? Well, basically, any web application is going to end up using the DOM, and that's really what it ends up coming down to, and it gives us the ability to programmatically use JavaScript, which is the only language in the browser. Gives us the ability to use JavaScript. You like that, huh? gives us the ability, right, to basically use JavaScript to manipulate the DOM. It connects them to HTML. So again, this is fairly obvious, right? It's hot because all these frameworks end up manipulating the DOM. Again, initial web application, fairly simple. Wasn't all that much going on. It basically was just outputting some text. And the document object model is basically going to be this tree structure, which you ended up seeing before. So there's this technically correct definition of the DOM, but really I think what this ends up coming down to, and all these things were described earlier, and I'll send you a copy of these slides, but one of the things that you could sort of look at here, and I don't know about these other two, but when you end up looking at sort of serialization, if you think about the HTML page and you think about it as just this text file, right? What happens is that's sort of the serialized version of the DOM, meaning that if we go in the other direction and we deserialize it, we take that HTML, we have it loaded to the DOM, then we have a living object. Then we can take that DOM and we can serialize it back down into HTML. So we think about our text file as being serialized, not that special. When it ends up loading into the DOM, it's deserialized, and we have something that we can end up manipulating. This is something to do with the matrix. Okay, this is David and his son, James. So again, this is just showing you different elements, right? We have an H1, an H2, and a paragraph tag. Not much of a tree, although above these you would have a body tag. Above that, you would end up having an HTML tag. So again, I sort of described this before, where if we think about the DOM is if it helps you think about it, the DOM is going to be this sort of deserialized version of your HTML page. You could really go back and forth in both directions. So the DOM is a tree, and if you think about these trees, you have these nodes. And so the body is a node. The body, what you're looking at here is the body has 3 children, 1, 2, and 3. Okay? This P tag has 3 children. Okay? And those are all nodes. All those things are nodes, and you can have 0 children, you can have multiple children. But that's really what the tree structure is. Right? I mean, your siblings would be your parents' other children. So here's an example of what that DOM might look like. You like to indent because it gives you a better idea of what the DOM is. You know, we've looked at this with HTML tags. This is a D3 analogy, which I wasn't that sure what that was, but you could also use tools. I guess there's a demo that you could do with Firefox to see the different levels of the DOM. You could get the same reaction. Maybe it's not as cool, but you saw me do it with the dev tools in order to do that. So tree structures, fairly easy to navigate, right? You have this idea of, and they're a little bit different than when we're looking at the BST tree. You didn't have that concept of a parent node. You could only go down. But here, if you actually have a node, you could actually keep on going up and saying, give me my parent node, give me my parent node, give me my parent node. At some point, you're going to be at that HTML tag, and you're not going to have any parent node. So there's ways of actually going in and manipulating the DOM. There's also different methods that you have. You have this concept of your first child, your last child, and your children. There's also ways to, when we look at this, what we're looking at is really navigating the DOM. So there's, once you have a node, you have the ability to actually get the next sibling, and the next sibling, and the next sibling after that. But it would probably be just as easy to actually go up and get the parent node and look at the children of the parent node. In the end, you're going to look at what the API is. The API is going to show you the different ways that you could go and manipulate the DOM. The other thing is that nodes have attributes. So when you end up looking at a DOM, you could see all the properties of all the elements in the DOM. And so you could look at one node in the DOM and you could see there's, you know, hundreds of properties that are there. So this is all stuff that we looked at with the demo. We've got our document object, right? We've got our global reference to our window object, but we also have that global reference to that document object. By the way, not in the slide. The reason why we have that is because the document object is on the window object, and everything that's on the window object is available to us. That's why we have that document object. We can navigate the DOM, we can manipulate the DOM. And the document object is our connection that allows us to basically manipulate this. So we've got this JavaScript engine, which gives us this document object model. And it's really this document object that allows us to connect these two things. What I really like to think about is that JavaScript gives us an API for manipulating the DOM, right? And it's again, the idea that whoever ended up creating the browser gave us this ability to do that. They've implemented this API. So there's all information that you could look up navigating the DOM. Some of these we looked at. We can do get element by ID, get elements by class name, get elements by tag name, and there's also some query selectors that I actually haven't used. You could do this. We haven't done it, but you could actually get the children of an element. We got the last child, the first child. You could actually go to the different siblings. You could move up to the parent element. All different ways of moving around to the DOM. The other thing is that you have the ability to manipulate the DOM by going in and adding elements, creating nodes. And one thing that we haven't done is that if you did have an element, one thing you could do to the element is that you could manipulate it through a style object. So a DOM element has a style property. And if these would be the properties on your CSS, these aren't valid names here for a dot. So in order to do that, we could have done this with my demo as well. You could take an element. If you do document get element by ID, or you get one of your H1s, as long as it's a valid DOM element, you could set style properties to dynamically change how the DOM ends up looking. Very often, instead of doing that directly, what you'll end up doing is that you'll modify the class list. So one of the things that you have for the DOM, by the way, this class list is also sort of feels like a collection, but isn't quite a collection. But it's got some methods on it. So you could end up adding a class. You could end up removing a class. You could see if your class list contains something. So it smells a little bit like an array, but it's not quite. None of those are array methods. Things that we've done in the demo, creating an element. You could also clone an element. And again, we've seen this. Nodes are just free floating. They don't do anything until we end up manipulating them. We've seen the append child. You could also do a prepend child to control the order. You could also insert something, because again, if you think about it, when you're inserting something, you're inserting it in the tree. Okay? You're inserting it as a child. You can control exactly where you want it. Insert before. This is what you're inserting. You want to insert it before this sibling. Okay? So this sibling better be a child of this node if you're going to do that. You could end up removing elements. You could remove a child. This is kind of another way to do that. Take the node you want to remove, go up to the parent node, tell the parent node to remove the child of this node. Looks a little bit weird, but it works. You could also use the inner HTML. We looked at that, so this is kind of a quick and dirty way of actually getting an element and adding a UL tag with an LI into it. Right? So again, you control that inner HTML property. We've also looked at events and event handlers. So we did this where you could end up adding an event listener. There's all types of events that are in the DOM. There's hover events, there's mouse over events, there's form submission events. Click events are the easiest ones to get started with. We also saw the idea of preventing event bubbling. If you have event handlers on the click event, and you have this tree, so you have a UL, and you have an event handler on for click on the UL, and also on the LI, it'll bubble up. If you don't want it to bubble up, you could prevent the propagation. Oh, this is two different things, I'm sorry. So this is actually, if you had something that was going to be, there are some default events. For instance, if you click on an A tag, it'll try to navigate to an href, okay? If you end up submitting a form, it's going to try to go into a post with that form. So if you want to prevent this default behavior, you could do prevent default, which I didn't demonstrate. What I demonstrated was actually to stop propagation, stopping the bubbling up. And that does it for this demo. So let me stop this recording.